Good morning, people. Thank you for the enthusiasm in the conversation. I appreciate it. Let's continue a little bit. First of all, I want to be very forthright about embracing the attitude that I do try to espouse here of being a descriptive thinker, not a prescriptive thinker. Meaning that I want to limit my own perspectives that I'm trying to share with you to and completely that which I've done and that's which I've personally experienced. There's a very important value that I hold kind of irrationally, or kind of a belief, I guess, that ultimately, as we move through the creative process here together, pretty well every path needs to be walked. And whatever your right path is, your right path. There's certainly camaraderie to be had from individuals who are fellow journeyers or shipmates on that path. But I don't have any interest in being some kind of supposed expert. In fact, when I do get asked on occasion, because people have a tendency to be suspicious of my atheism, they're like, the way you live your life and such, you come across as a very spiritual person. And I was like, I'm absolutely not. They say, but you live like a person that believes in something really profound and important. And I was like, well, thanks. And I probably do. And they were like, well, what is that? Is that God? And I'm like, my answer to that question really is that, that's just too small of a word. Like, my complaint with most of the creeds that I encounter out there is that they're just too small and too naive for the reality that we face. Without a doubt, there's a kind of confidence that you get in older texts and ideas that come from the late Stone Age or early Bronze Age, where the world was a lot simpler. And there might have been people who were possessed of a certain kind of megalomaniacal confidence out there that really thought that they understood what the universe looked like and comprised. But and I imagine, in perhaps some degree, educated individuals might have even carried that up into the late, maybe 1800s, but not in this world. Not in the context of, Hawking's and his many universes model, especially like his last paper on that, which seems to be pretty well supported and accepted now, that every possible universe exists. And there are possible universes out there that would be really, really, really very different than the one, this current iteration of ourselves inhabits. And the scale of a scientifically informed view of what reality appears to be at this moment in history, and it's only getting bigger, is so large that to have too much confidence in one's perspective, other than it being only your perspective, is pretty naive. But there is something beautiful in that. It's like we find ourselves in possession of this huge task of perhaps making an attempt to climb this mountain, which we might have thought was doable in the past. But now we know that no one has actually ever climbed this mountain, nor even got a glimpse of the summit. In fact, no one even knows how tall this mountain perhaps is. It's just that as we move through life, all of us will discover various ways of making an attempt to do it, and some of us will get a little further up than others. The further up the mountain you get, the better view that you get of the surrounding terrain, no doubt, or so we'd hope. But I think, Perhaps Terence McKenna, in a very prescient manner, said this like 20 years ago. It's like the modern mind needs to understand that the universe is a lot weirder than we think. In fact, it's weirder than we can think or ever will think. We are approaching the deeply profound here. And my only point in this stuff isn't even to elevate my own perspectives, but more, in a practical sense, discuss the skills. Just like if I were a mountaineer, really it's the ropes and the shackles and the carabiners and the stuff that I use to get up the slopes. That's a more interesting conversation. The rest of it you can't really share unless you actually happen to climb with me. Anyway, I thought I would say that because there's a danger in this kind of material of starting to sound pretty pretentious, but ultimately I want to keep it very, very real. And also, I would say, especially for those of you that enjoyed the last video on practical transcendence, that I don't have any beef with meditative practice. I mean, I've been involved in that for most of my life, and I don't have a beef with the use of psychedelics or other means of consciousness expanding tools. I don't. I am just of the personal opinion, because of my own, I guess, prejudices here, that for many of us, those are not really super effective tools, okay? And they haven't been, while both, let me say, have been, I guess, useful to me at points in my life, they have not, neither of those have ever meaningfully generated for me what we're trying to describe here, which is transcendent experience. Transcendent experience specifically meaning something that brings you knowledge, gnosis, that is sufficient enough to either break down, destroy, cross over, however you want to phrase it, previous understandings of a way of looking at the world and introducing to you something novel and new. Okay? I have not found, at least for myself, meditative practice to ever rise to that bar, nor the use of hallucinogens to rise to that bar. And I would also go so far to say that I haven't really observed it in other people. I haven't seen at least very many individuals who have spent, I don't know, a week at some retreat doing something, who have come away with some kind of gnosis that was profound enough that they changed their life. They did things differently from then forward. This is what I mean by transcendent. You are crossing over. You are transcending into a new paradigm. I'm seeking precisely here the experiences that cross you over into a new paradigm, so that your previous way of interacting and relating with reality no longer suffices. And I'm sure you can find people throughout history that have. In my own personal experience, I don't think I've ever actually met anybody who's done that through meditation, nor through the use of hallucinogens. But I certainly know people, and certainly for myself, trial by ordeal, like we described in the last video, has achieved that for me. In fact, I would go so far as to say that various kinds of meditative practices or such, or, again, hallucinogens, for myself, I have found that trying to seek transcendent experience through those means had a tendency to be costly and take a lot of time and effort and was a distraction. In fact, if you get into that stuff really heavily, it can actually come as a real impediment to living your life. I mean, you could potentially go out and, say, join some monastery and put on pajamas and stare at the wall for 20 years. Like, you're going to give up a great deal to take on those paths in a big way. Again, I haven't seen anybody really who's made an attempt to stare at a wall for 20 years that have come back with anything really that interesting. But I will say that if you don't go that route and you simply take on the task of living your life robustly and immediately and with your eyes wide open and turned out and with your ears open to listen, very different than being in the midst of a pipe dream or having one's eyes closed or staring at a candle or something. If you go with the outward route, you live your life absolutely robustly and in spades. And it's actually only been there when I've really been doing that the transcendent experiences come to me, and they come to me of their own accord. Like, it's not something I can even evade. It's not something I'm trying to have. They come naturally, profoundly, and transformatively. Would really encourage a lot of people to kind of reflect on that if transcendence, gnosis, and novel perspectives of how to live your life are your interest. Now, I understand that this is a very heterodox, contrarian view that I'm offering up here. But I think there's a reason that we can suspect as to why it is. Like, we can ask ourselves, why is it that we hear so stinking much about, meditative practice, or why is yoga so incredibly popular, or why are hallucinogens so like hip and vogue, and you hear these endless conversations about trips on DMT or whatever else, and again, all espoused by people that are ultra conventional. Okay, they're coming back to you, and there's podcasts out there upon podcasts endlessly gassing off about how amazing this experience was, being mouthed by people that live just absolutely McLives. Okay, I mean, not all of them, but man, it is very conspicuous, right? And there's a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, I mean, while people do seek, they have a nose for a transcendent experience, not everybody really wants it. Right? They'd like to be thought of as a person that has had a transcendent experience. Everybody wants to, get the merit badge or the little belt or the robe from the monastery and parade around in that and get the status for it. But there is no status in transcendent experience. In fact, there's a hell of a lot of inconvenience. If you actually come to have a deeper and more intimate view of how to relate with a larger vision of the universe than you had a week ago, it's going to be a pain in the butt, actually. You're going to have to change how you live your life. There are going to be things that you're going to be compelled to do that you weren't before, things that you worry about that you didn't before. There's going to be values that you had that you gave up. There's going to be things that you invested in that you feel foolish about investing in now. So, like, really not very many people really want to have that, okay? And the real thing will be like that, okay? And there's also just this, that often the conversation is dominated by relatively high status people who can spend a lot of time at some big yoga retreat or take fancy vacations out and lick toads or whatever. Those are not individuals that like to admit failure. So everybody comes back and really blows up this whole notion about like how amazing it was. But again, from the outside, we can talk about, like, in reality, well, how transformative was it? Was there any gnosis to be had there? After your trip, what is it that you come back and are going to do differently? Actually, I was invited out to an ayahuasca retreat here about 4 years ago. It had been my second time of doing that. The first time wasn't very good. Second time was a little more interesting, but it was kind of a horrible scene, really. Just a bunch of very pretentious people all vomiting in a dark room full of stinky tobacco smoke. And I'm lying there feeling crappy. And I did actually had this very brief but interesting message from the plant. And that was this. It came in like this shimmering feathered thing. It said very pointedly to me, it's like, you're completely wasting your time here. And it was completely true. And yeah, that was close to Transcendent, small t. And I basically just got up and left and went and sat on the beach and waited for everybody else to sober up. I've never been back involved with any of that since. I think that was hilarious. Pretty authentic, actually. But yeah, I think adopting a value as we move through this of just trying to really keep it real. And if we have the conversation, let's try to have the conversation in the context of this understanding of gnosis, knowledge that is actionable and matters. And the evidence for individuals that are in possession of knowledge that is actionable, this gnosis, is that they do things differently. They make different choices. In fact, the making of different choices is part of the resume of any would-be practitioner of any of this stuff, right? And if we just embraced that, I think it would go a very long way to guiding us personally, again, to find our own personal path up this mountain, observing what it is that the individuals did who actually did have transcendent experiences where there was change that they experienced, that they evolved, they made different choices, their relationships were different in the future. Otherwise, we end up mired in this mess, and there's so much of it, especially online. You know, it's like the ubiquitous narcissism videos, some of which people think are valuable, but they've been watching them for 15 goddamn years, and there's been no transcendent that's been coming from them. Or relationship videos, and they've been watching those for 15 goddamn years, and their relationships still suck just as much as they did 15 years ago. At some point, it doesn't hurt to abandon the path that you're on up the mountain if you're not climbing and getting any further or getting any new perspectives or anything. It doesn't hurt to retreat while you still have time and try something else. And especially if your time is short, like it is for all of us, seeking some perspective from individuals who have obviously done it a couple of different ways and have succeeded and have found a certain kind of transcendence and have left things behind in their life and have gained new things. It's good to surround ourselves with those people. But there's no profiteering in that. It's like if there was good advice out there for, say, I don't know, overcoming your narcissistic relationship, good advice would probably solve your problem in one YouTube episode, and then you'd go along your merry life, having found gnosis and transcended that problem. I mean, the fact that that doesn't happen just is kind of indicative that the advice is really not particularly useful. Let's try to keep it really useful. Anyway, just some quick thoughts. We'll follow up on this again in a day or two. Let's calibrate and get our climbing gear all tight. Cheers, peeps.